How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and here's a look at the water vapor imagery for Hurricane Lee, and it speaks for itself. Pretty much, the storm is very powerful. The eye is very visible at this point. We're seeing convection on all sides of this storm system. The outflow is very well ventilated, moving at all sides of this storm, so there isn't a strong amount of wind shear. There isn't dry air inhibiting this storm from developing. It looks like the perfect hurricane. If I were to give you guys an example of what a powerful major hurricane would look like, you can't ask for a better picture than what you're seeing right now with Hurricane Lee. Right now, it's at the time of this recording, it's a Category 4 hurricane with winds at around 130 miles per hour. However, the hurricane hunters have entered the storm and as of recently have measured millibar pressures in the range of the 920s. So in the very next update, we very well could see Category 5 in our hands, and that's what's expected right now from the National Hurricane Center. There's really nothing that's going to slow this thing down other than potentially an eye wall replacement cycle. But even if that occurs, this is still an extremely powerful storm, and you see not a lot of dry air, not a lot of wind shear. Is only going to continue to intensify most likely. So here's what the latest European model run is stating at this point, and already it's definitely it definitely underestimated how fast the storm actually intensified, because right now Hurricane Lee's millibar pressure is right about 953 millibars, and it's pretty much guaranteed that it's lower than that based on the latest readings of from the hurricane hunters. So expected to be closer, potentially right around the 930s. At this point, the European model expected this storm system to be at 990 millibars, which is nowhere near the strength we're at right now. So already the European model is off when it comes to intensity, and the European model from here only wants to strengthen this storm even more down to the 950s in terms of millibar pressure. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we see a 175 or 180 mile per hour hurricane, or potentially even more than that, just to the north of the Caribbean islands. And the saving grace is that this is going to move just north of the Caribbean islands, which is certainly good news, because that would have been extremely concerning if this were to even bring at least some impacts to the Caribbean islands as a Category 5 hurricane. But we do see this will continue to intensify, and of course a big question that's been looming over the past several days is if whether or not this is going to impact the East Coast. And unfortunately, the trend hasn't been very good today, because if we were to take a look at the latest run of the European model, it brings the storm a lot further eastward than before, where now it brings a landfall right over Maine, which in fact would be the first time in 50 years that Maine would experience a landfalling hurricane. If this were to come for fruition, of course, this is very far out. This is far from certain. Expect more changes over the next several days, and unfortunately, at least even compared to yesterday, the certainty hasn't risen that much, which means that we're still going to probably see many shifts in the forecast over the next several days, unless somehow the computer models at this point are correct. But that almost never happens when when we're forecasting something that's over 7 days out. So definitely expect changes in the forecast, but this would be very concerning if this were to come this far east, because this would bring potentially nearly a major hurricane at landfall right up along the southern coast of Maine. It's hovering around 966 millibars, which could be considered a Category 3 hurricane. I'm not sure if it'll actually have the wind speed of Category 3, because of course the further northward this system moves, the larger the wind field will be thanks to baroclinic influences, and the larger the wind field, the less likely we're going to see the convergence be as strong around center circulation for the wind speed to at least be considered Category 3 strength. But when it comes to impact, of this and magnitude of this storm system, it's definitely hovering around Category 3 strength, which would definitely potentially be catastrophic for the coast of Maine. Even other parts of New England, like Massachusetts, Cape Cod, would experience nearly direct impacts. The eye isn't very far from Boston, and a large portion of New England would experience heavy flooding rain from this, even if the eye wall is hundreds of miles away. So New England, you definitely need to be at least aware of this possibility over the next several days. The reason why the European model is forecasting this storm system to move further east is because it expects this trough that's expected to move in right around the Tuesday to Wednesday time frame of next week to move rather quickly, and it'll weaken quite significantly, and this ridge will build. So this ridge would be able to force a storm a little bit further eastward, uncomfortably close to the New England coast, since of course on the southern side of this ridge the winds move from more of an easterly direction, and that would push the storm a little bit further east, which is definitely something we don't see every day. It's very rare for a ridge to be strong enough to be able to steer a hurricane this close to the coast, but this could certainly be a possibility if this trough ends up being as weak as the European model is currently expecting and moves as quick as the European model is expecting. Because if this moves a little bit slower, then we're more likely to see this ridge be a little weaker, and we're more likely to see this trough at least shift the wind direction towards more of a westerly direction to steer this a little bit further off the coast. That would certainly be the good news, but the European model wants to weaken this trough and makes trough exit rather quickly for this storm to not really feel much of the effects of that westerly flow. So we see a landfall right around Maine, and there's still uncertainty regarding how strong this trough will be, how strong this ridge will be, of course, because we're still very far out. But if we were to take a look at the forecast at a more manageable forecast time period, 7 days out, we have a strong ridge right over eastern Canada and a relatively powerful trough. We're definitely gonna beyond that point, it's definitely uncertain, but the possibility certainly exists this could move east enough to bring impacts along New England and potentially a landfall. So definitely stay tuned as we get more updates. Historically speaking, it's very rare for a hurricane to take a track where it takes a left hook like this, mainly because it's very rare for a trough to be strong enough to steer to shift the surface level wind direction from an easterly direction to steer a hurricane along the coast without being deterred by a trough moving through. But of course, weather is unpredictable. We see anomalies all the time, and this unfortunately could be one of them based on what we're seeing right now. But definitely stay tuned for more updates. This could still maybe easily move out to sea, maybe bringing some impacts to southern Canada. That's what the GFS model was forecasting in its last run, but we're definitely going to need to be aware of the possibility of impacts right along New England as early as next week. And unfortunately, the GFS model, while the GFS model is showing a better scenario than what the European model is currently stating at this point, where it does take it relatively far from New England. Portions of Maine do experience some impacts, but for the most part, it doesn't bring any direct impacts like the European model is stating. But the reason why I say it's not good news taking a look at the latest run of the GFS model is because the latest run of the GFS model has shifted its forecasts just slightly further westward to where the United States would experience more impacts, and of course southern Canada would definitely experience direct impacts in a scenario like this, where we see a landfall right around Nova Scotia area of Maine, where the GFS model expects this trough to be a little bit weaker, this ridge to be a little bit stronger, so we see a slightly westward shift in the forecast. We're going to need to see if this trend continues. Let me show you guys the 12Z run actually right now to show you guys the difference. And moving forward, we see that in the 18Z run, it wanted to bring a landfall closer to Nova Scotia, but in the 12Z run, which was a run prior to the 18Z run, it brings a storm a lot further eastward to where the United States experiences far less impacts, and so does much of southern Canada outside of maybe Newfoundland. But this is definitely concerning if the GFS model continues its trend where it wants to steer the storm further westward. Even if the 18Z run was correct, the good news is that it wouldn't bring at least direct impacts to New England, so hopefully it's still it doesn't really shift its forecast to a point where it brings landfall to the United States. But there's still a lot of time to iron out the forecast. Definitely pay close attention. But let's go to the 7-day mark. We see a strong ridge, a stronger trough than what the European model is forecasting, and really it all depends on this trough. The stronger the trough is, the more likely we're going to see a westerly wind steer this away from the northeast. So definitely keep this in mind. I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days. And like I said, in terms of the strength forecast of this storm system, it doesn't seem like it's gonna really become a weak storm anytime soon. In fact, even as it moves up northward, close to the latitude of New England and Canada, the storm's pressure is still at 964 millibars. That's still equivalent to a Category 3 hurricane, and it's the reason why I haven't gone too in depth with the strength forecast, because it's likely going to stay a strong storm even as it moves further northward, because we do see there isn't going to be a lot of wind shear. The dry air won't be a big issue. While the dry air will entrain the storm a little bit as it moves further northward, the baroclinic instability will help maintain the strength of this storm. So this will still be a powerful storm even as it moves just north of the Gulf Stream, where sea surface temperatures would fall below the 70-degree mark. So in terms of strength, pretty much expect a strong storm. It will weaken just a little bit once it moves further northward, but it'll still be probably a Category 3 as it moves up the western Atlantic, which is definitely would be concerning, because if this were to somehow make landfall right around New England, that would bring catastrophic impacts and would be the first major hurricane to impact Northeast in over 60 years. So definitely at least keep tabs on this. Definitely way too early to panic just yet. I definitely won't hype this storm up like it's going to impact the Northeast. That's still far from certain at this time, but at least just be aware of this and stay tuned for more updates. So here are what the ensemble members are stating, and hopefully the GFS ensemble members do end up being the more accurate forecast, because then it would pretty much force the storm to not bring impacts to the east coast of the United States, and the impacts will mainly be relegated to southern Canada, which southern Canada, I will say it's increasingly likely will at least experience some impacts, and I'll say it's potentially more likely than not you will experience direct impacts, especially right around the Newfoundland area at the very least, since it seems like it's going to be difficult for this storm to completely move far west enough with a ridge as strong to avoid at least southern Canada. So you definitely need to be on high alert at this point right around southern Canada for the potential of direct impacts. But in terms of the United States and New England, still a little bit too uncertain. The European model is showing that the ensemble members are all over the place. They're somewhere in between the border of Maine and Canada. So Maine, you definitely need to be aware of the potential of direct impacts. It's still far from certain if you'll experience that, but at least keep tabs on what the computer models are stating over the next several days. And of course, when it comes to strength, this will likely become a Category 5, slightly weakened into Category 4 and Category 3 as it moves up further northward, but we could potentially see a major hurricane landfall anywhere between Canada and as far west as Maine and New England. Here's what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting over the next several days, and we do see it expects this to maintain major hurricane status over the next 5 days. And still, the National Hurricane Center hasn't shifted its forecast where it would take that northward turn, but I do expect that to show up maybe tomorrow once we get a little bit further into the future. And the good news is this would spare the Caribbean islands from any direct impacts, but watch out for a high rip current risk as well as rough surf and beach erosion along the coast. So here's a look at the forecasted wave heights over the next several days up along the East Coast. And like I said in my last video, whether this makes landfall in the by the United States or not, or at right around southern Canada, you should expect a high rip current risk and rough surf all along the East Coast of the United States as well as southern Canada. So make sure to stay out the water if you're advised to, because rip current risk could be life-threatening at times. So in terms of my overall forecast, so still not much changes when it comes to the certainty of where this will who this will impact as this moves further northward. I will say at the very least southern Canada will likely experience impacts. New England, it's a bit more uncertain, so make sure to stay tuned for more updates, and I'll definitely keep you guys updated over the next several days. But that's it for now, guys. I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure also to follow my TikTok for more weather related content, and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more hurricane season updates.